Third, how are you doing today? I hope you're doing well. I hope God is blessing you. We are going to talk today about Amenhotep III. And I think he's one of the most important, one of the more important kings of ancient Kemet to talk about. Amenhotep III is somebody I think is significant. And as you read about his life, and as I've read about his life, there's so much that comes out of his life. And I'm going to try to do it justice today to give you some information, some synopsis of Amenhotep III, and kind of go over some highlights of his life and why was he significant, why was he important. That's going to be the topic of what we talk about today. And I'll just ask before I start and before I kind of get into things, I ask you to do one or two things. I ask you to take a look at my books down below, Stories About Black History. You can see a copy of the cover right there. I've written several books about Black history as well as education, as well as They Can't Pull Us Up, a story about and our ratings about the life of Harriet Tubman, as well as a new historical fiction kind of book called The Adventures of Tahari. You can find all that through the link below on Amazon. I'll ask that you check it out. Please give me some support. I really appreciate that. And I'll also ask that you share this with someone. Please share this one. At least hit the share button, hit the like button, hit the share button. Tell somebody about this. Let's get this information out here. I really do think he's one of the more important kings in ancient Kemetic history, and we should know more about him and know what he looks like, know things about his life. So we're going to jump right into that now, and I ask that you would share this with somebody and talk to somebody about it. So this is Amenhotep III. This is a statuette of Amenhotep III, and he is a king in the 18th dynasty. So he's a part of the New Kingdom. He's a part of that very famous, that's one of the most famous dynasties in ancient Kemet's history. Dynasty 18 is just one of the most famous dynasties for so many reasons. There are people like Akhenaten there and Amos the First and him, and eventually you have so many other people that are a part of that King Tutankhamun. Those people are there. He is somebody who I think fits right up there and somebody we should talk about. So who is he? He is King Amenhotep III. He is also someone, he reigned from about 1390 BC to about 1352 BC. So that's when he reigned. And he is Akhenaten's dad. He's Akhenaten's father. So if you are thinking about the famous Akhenaten, people talk about Akhenaten and they say that he was the first person to really think about monotheism and to kind of put that forth in the world. I don't think that's completely true because they had a one source of God prior to Akhenaten. People believe that, and people believe that in Kemet. But that's what they say about Akhenaten. So if you think about the very famous Akhenaten and him being associated with monotheism, well, this is his dad. This is Akhenaten's dad. Before Akhenaten changed his name to Akhenaten, he was Amenhotep IV. So his dad was Amenhotep III, and he was Amenhotep IV. And he took on the name Amenhotep as well as one of his throne names when he became king. But he decided to change his religion and his view of the world spiritually, and that's when he changed his name. But this was his dad. This was Akhenaten's dad, Amenhotep III. In addition to that, not only was he Akhenaten's dad, that would make him King Tut's granddad, King Tutankhamun's granddad. So when you want to think about King Tutankhamun and you want to think about his bloodline and his family line, well, you're looking at his family line right here. You're looking at Amenhotep III. So he has some significant contributions right there, and just in terms of his lineage and the people that come after him. Imagine being able to have a heritage and a lineage and posterity, people who come after you in your family who are remarkable in and of themselves, and they had some big shoes to fill. He had some big shoes to fill because he does some amazing things, I think, as well in his life. So he's famous for that, being Akhenaten's dad and King Tut's granddad, but he also is famous for another family member, another person who he chose to marry, and that is Queen Tiye. So if you are familiar with Queen Tiye, if you know her, you probably have heard about her. She's very famous queen in ancient Kemet. This was his wife. This was one of his main wives, if you will, and you will find one of the amazing things about him is that he did a lot to include Queen Tiye in a lot of the official state occasions that were happening and state ceremonies. Her name is prominent, not just her like being there and her face is, her name is prominent on state documents and state occasions, saying that they're doing this on behalf of the king who lives forever and the great wife, Queen Tiye, and mention some honorary things about her. So Queen Tiye is his wife. So you start to think about Amenhotep III, you start thinking Akhenaten is his son, and he has his wife is Queen Tiye. He's already becoming famous, right? He's already somebody that you know about, and you start to think about. You say, wow, okay, so who is this guy? Let's learn more about him. So one of the things as I started to read about him and read documentation around the stone monuments that he left and things that were important in his life, we're going to kind of jump into that now because he did some important things that are worth talking about that we should touch on. So not only did he marry Queen Tiye, and this is also another depiction of him. This is a separate depiction of Amenhotep III by another sculptor that was of him as well. So he's a significant person. A lot of art and a lot of building took place under him, and we'll talk about some of the building projects that he did and some of the significant things he did with his life. But not only that, first we'll kind of touch a little bit on just some of his campaigns, because militarily speaking, always get asked the question. A lot of people ask the question about the relationship between Kemet and Kush, right? And how was that worked out and what was going on? So if you look there, right where Upper Nubia is, Kerma is right there where Upper Nubia. Kerma is the ancient site that we talked about yesterday that has so much history around it. It was the area where things were growing up there and above there and below there, just as things were developing in ancient Kemet during pre-dynastic time in the Old Kingdom. They were developing right here in the Sudan and Kush as well, and in other places in Africa and around the world. But by the time the New Kingdom comes around, by the time Amenhotep III is in power and he's a king in Dynasty 18, well, at this point in time in the New Kingdom, they control Kush. So they have all the way down from the Mediterranean Sea. They're taking their control of that. And as you go kind of up the river, if you will, going south as things kind of get higher and higher, you get into Upper Kemet, which is the southern part of Kemet. Then you get into Lower Nubia, which is like northern Nubia. And then you start getting into Upper Nubia. By this time, under Amenhotep III and under his predecessors, the New Kingdom, Kemet controlled Kush. So they controlled everything from that third cataract where Kerma is, even down to Napata, going to the fourth cataract and thereabouts, all the way out to the Mediterranean Sea. So at this time and then not only just that, because he wasn't just going into the Mediterranean Sea, he was also going into what we call the Middle East. So he had campaigns in what is today Turkey and Syria and that whole area right around there in Iraq. So though there were people who were around there, his campaigns would stretch all the way up to near where the same kind of latitudinal line is where Syria is, and near Lebanon and the border of Turkey. He was the New Kingdom in the Dynasty 18 were people who stretched all the way up there. So when you think about ancient Kemet during the 18th dynasty, it is not just Kemet proper, and it's not just Kemet and Kush that they're ruling. They're extending their reach and their influence and their control into Palestine, what today we would call Palestine, up through what would be, Lebanon, going into the border of Turkey. And so you're talking part of that Arabian Peninsula, the Sinai Peninsula. You're talking about all that whole area, as well as the northern part of ancient Kemet, the Delta, going all the way down the Nile into southern Kemet, southern Egypt, and all the way into Kush, in the Sudan. So they are controlling quite a bit, and he's controlling them, right? He's running it. So even though there's relative peace in his time, he has campaigns that he conducts. So there's several famous campaigns that he does in year 5 and year 6 in his reign, where he goes farther south into Nubia, and he has to put down a rebellion. So the Kushite people were a formidable power. They were continually fighting back. It was not like the New Kingdom just went there one time, they had a war and they stomped out the Kushite people. That was not the case. Apparently the Kushite people were continually doing coalitions and banding together and building up strongholds and attacking the various places that Kemetic people thought they had in control. They were attacking, whether it would be their forts or other areas that were strongholds. They were attacking, doing that. And there's a famous inscription that's written under Amenhotep III that talks about him and his scribe, basically saying that the people of Kush had it within their hearts. And they do say the word wretched Kush. I want you to know, people have asked the question, do they use the word wretched Kush sometimes in Kemetic literature in their documents? Well, they do. They say wretched everybody. They say, whether you're Asiatics, whether you are from what we call Syria, whether you were Libyan, whether you were from various places. They said everybody was basically under their foot. Everybody was bowing to them. So it wasn't like they were equal opportunity dissers, if you will. And if you see some of Amenhotep III's, some of his temples and some of the things like he has one of the famous temples called the Temple of Celeb, which he made around the second cataract, around right there in Nubia. He talks about, defeating the Syrians as well as defeating the Nubians. And you'll see on one side, you will see Syrians being trampled under his horse and chariot, and you'll see on the other side Nubians being trampled under his horse and chariot. So they say that they don't put any they don't make any differentiation or pay partial treatment to people who they're fighting. So there's a very famous battle that took place, that he underwent in year 5 and 6 of his reign. And he went down there into Upper Nubia, where you see Napata is, right around the Fourth Cataract, which was far for the Kemetic people to go. It's not easy to get to the Fourth Cataract. This is an area that is challenging to travel. You have to have a lot of organization, a lot of discipline to get there, and you have to know this area. He travels all the way down to the Fourth Cataract, and his scribe says, in the documentation I was reading, his scribe was saying that the people in Kush had a great deal of pride or haughtiness in their heart, that they had great things in their heart, that they were rising up against Kemet and rising up against Amenhotep III and the control that Kemet had over Kush. And they came down there, the Kemetic army came down there, and they had, they were organized, they were well trained, and they came there and they killed a good deal of Kushite people. Their documentation said they killed a little more than 1,000, either killed about 1,000 and or captured 1,000 Nubian people, Kushite people, right there around the Fourth Cataract, where you see the word Napata on that map right there, where you see Upper Nubia. He killed them, and he took them over. So the revolt that was happening under Amenhotep III from the Kushite people was basically squelched. It was put down because he was able to go that far, take his army, and destroy them. So you will find him having certain stela, certain stone monuments where he marks his victories. You have some at the Second Cataract around the Nile, right on the border where Sudan and Kemet is. You have some even a little farther south than that at temples that he has, marking that I was here, I extended the boundary of my fathers. I did something for God that was great, and I crushed these people who were trying to get me. And now I am in control of everything from this land of the Nubians all the way up to the Mitanni, or the people who were in what I mentioned, like Lebanon or Syria or near Turkey, people who are all the way up there, that I'm in control of all the 9 bows, if you will, the 9 realms. I'm in control of everything that we consider to be like important, everything we consider to be part of the world is under my feet. And so he's basically making that claim, and he makes that claim in year 5 and year 6 and documents some campaigns that he makes into Nubia, into Upper Nubia. So he becomes significant for that reason. He's not, somebody who's just kind of willy-nilly. He is somebody who is extending the borders, maintaining the borders of ancient Kemet. And then he starts to do some amazing things. He started to do some different things that's worth talking about. Not only does he marry Queen Tiye, but he has some interesting building projects that he takes on. And if you take a look at this right here, this is called the Colossal of Memnon. I don't know if you've ever heard it, the Colossi of Memnon. So this is something that actually is attributable to Amenhotep III and not to Memnon. So if you've ever heard of this, or you can remember a history lesson, if you thought about the Battle of Troy, the Trojan War, the famous Trojan War, the famous Greek Trojan War, there is a story, a part of the story where there's a figure, and his name is Memnon. And Memnon is supposed to be the king of Ethiopia. And the king of Ethiopia brings his army to Troy to try to help out Troy. He brings there, and he's supposed to be a very, very strong fighter, a wonderful, a strategic man and a military man. And apparently he kills someone in the battle, and he fights Achilles, and he gets killed by Achilles. So Memnon is a famous figure in the Trojan War and the story of the Battle of the Trojan War. So apparently, this right here is actually something that belongs to Amenhotep III's mortuary temple, his temple that was built probably 1300 BC when he was alive during his time in preparation for his death. And so what happened was, the story goes, from what I was reading and some of the scholars, what they believe is that some 1,000 years after Amenhotep, many years after Amenhotep lived, apparently, obviously, Greeks came in and they began to control Egypt around 330 BC, and then the Romans came in after that, and people saw these colossal statues, which were huge and beautiful. It must have been beautiful at the time. They were of Amenhotep III. And the one particularly on the right there, on the far right, they looked at it and they said, this must be Memnon, because when you say Amenhotep and you say his name in Greek, it kind of comes out like a Nimim or a Mim. It comes out kind of somewhat sounding like Memnon, and people just assumed this must be Memnon, and it's kind of stuck. So right now, if you go to Google right now, if you go and search on the internet and you just type in Colossi of Memnon, you're going to see these pictures. You're going to see this picture right here, and you're going to say, wow, this is actually what we're still calling the Colossal Memnon. So Memnon is obviously not a Kemetic person. This is not, and it's not like the story of the Trojan War was not a Kemetic story. It's a Greek story. It's a Greek history story. But so people begin to think that this was it, but this is not Memnon. This has nothing to do with the Trojan War. These are not statues to the Trojan War. These are statues, I thought it was, these are statues to Amenhotep III. They are his statues. They are of him. And this was a part of his mortuary temple. So apparently his temple, and this was located in Thebes. So if you go right down there where it says Upper Kemet, Upper Egypt there, that's Thebes. That area was Waset. It's called Thebes now. This area was Waset. And that area was a significant area. That's where all the stuff was happening. You know, in the 18th dynasty, the people who were part of the 18th dynasty they were families. There was a royal family, a family that was from Thebes, from Waset, from the southern part of Egypt. And Amenhotep was one of them, right? So it was a family from the southern part of Kemet that was royal, that saw themselves as continuing to rule and saw themselves as continuing the traditions that had been going on for thousands of years in ancient Kemet. It had gone on since 3000 BC, and it was the 18th dynasty, the start of the 18th dynasty, the first pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, Amos the first, who went and reunited the lands at the start of the 18th dynasty. So he kicked out the Hyksos, he reunited the lands and the two lands again, and they became the dynasty 18, if you will. And so that's where the center of the capital, they put the capital of Kemet was right there. So at this time, by the time you get into Dynasty 18, the capital of Kemet is farther south. So a lot of people will talk about south. They'll talk about southern Kemet. You notice how it borders right there with Nubia. If there's nothing really stopping the Nubians and interaction that takes place. And one of the things that's really significant, I feel, that he talks about in his capturing of the Nubian people when he captured them, like I said, he captured or killed about 1,000 people in that one campaign that they did in year 5. Most of them were captured. About maybe a few hundred of them were actually killed, but most of them were captured, and they took them back. So a lot of times when you would have wars, you have all types of things were going on where there was all types of intercourse and discourse and interaction between the people of Nubia and the people of Kemet going on all the time. People were getting married. People were, they were enjoying things. They were having, economics, commerce going on, all kinds of things you would find. Nubian people among the common people. You had Nubian people all over. You had interactions taking place as you would typically have between people who normally just converse with one another and interact with one another in all kinds of ways. Not only just from war, when you're bringing, hundreds of people or even over time, thousands of people into your area and you're making them work or whatever that's going to be, you're making them work or you're bringing them into your area as prisoners of war. And they did it not only to Nubians, they did it to Syrians. If you read his documentation, the same thing happened with Syrian people. They brought them in, people from what we would call Palestine, and they brought them into ancient Kemet, and they had them work in the temples, or they had them as people who were going to be servants of Amen. So, and eventually you would imagine that things just kind of moved forward and people kind of mixed and mingled as times went on. So it wasn't just Nubia they did this with. They had prisoners of war they brought from various parts of the places where they fought. That's what they did back in the day. You fought somebody, you took prisoners of war, and you took their people, and you took their gold or whatever precious things they had, their animals, their resources, and you took them and you brought them back to your place and you used them. So that was no different in terms of ancient Kemet than almost any ancient society you think about. So Amenhotep III did that, and he became someone who was very, very significant when it comes to building. So I mentioned right here, you can see this is the remains of his mortuary temple. And these two colossal statues here that they thought were the statues of Memnon or a statue of Memnon were not them. They were of him. And if you can see in the back, you can see more very, very far back. You can see additional statues there. They are a part of his mortuary temple. And apparently when it was built and when it was erected, it was a beautiful temple. Apparently it was one of the amazing temples there at the time when it was built. And he had it such that, they used, I want to think, mud brick as part of there. They used stone, a combination of stone and mud brick. And as you know, mud brick, as we talked about from what people were doing in Kerma and in Kush, mud brick, just like what you see in various places in Africa, mud brick will eventually kind of wash away and wear away over time if it's not kept up. So I think some of his, from what I've read, some of his temple was made out of mud brick and some was made out of stone. And then you had some later on, people like in the 19th dynasty came and took some of his stone and used it in their temples. That happened, right? So you don't see a lot of his temple left, but his temple was there. There's also an interesting story about this statue here on the right, that when the Romans were in charge and taking over Egypt, and they thought this was called the statue of Memnon, and this is what people thought. Apparently, there was an earthquake that took place, maybe in 27 BC or thereabouts. An earthquake took place, and when the earthquake took place, there started to be this hissing, this sound, this whistling that was coming from the statue on the right there. And apparently, they thought it had to be some type of sublimation with the growth or something was going on inside the statue that had to be cleaned out. But it was in the morning when the sun would rise and whatever dew was on the statue would kind of heat up, you would hear this hissing sound come out, like a whistling sound coming out of the statue. And it was like freaking people out. They were like, yes, this is Memnon. They thought it was something because this is Memnon. Something's going on. The statue was like making noise. It's like whistling. But apparently one of the leaders there and Roman leaders in Egypt had the statue cleaned and fixed, and it doesn't do that anymore. It hasn't done that apparently for a long time. So Amenhotep, but these, as I mentioned, these are not statues of Memnon. These is Amenhotep III. These are his statues, and they're statues of him. So not only does he build this beautiful temple there, he builds also one of the more important temples, Kemetic temples in Upper Nubia, right between the Second Cataract and where you see Kerma is there. He built the Temple of Soleb. So if you ever look at the Temple of Soleb, it's Soleb. He built that temple, which is one of the, architecturally speaking, is one of the most significant temples that a Kemetic king built in Kush. And that was built under Amenhotep III. He built a significant temple there that still there remains there today, that the ruins are still there. And you can see some of the evidence of his work and things of that nature. It's kind of interesting because his son, Akhenaten, when he became, kind of a devotee of Aten and wanted to be monotheistic, he actually carved out his dad's name in a couple places, and he carved out Amen on some of the temples that his dad built, and it was reestablished and rejuvenated, if you will, under Tutankhamen and successive kings after that, who reinstated Amen in places where Akhenaten took it out. But that's kind of a side story. So not only did he build his own mortuary temple, which was a significant temple there, he added the third pylon to the temple at Karnak. The temple at Karnak is a beautiful place. You may have seen it. You can look it up. You can see very many ruins there. And one of the things they would do, the kings of the new kingdom, they would add on sections to the temple of Karnak. So you might have a whole gateway, these pylons, which are huge gateways, these magnificent gateways you would walk through and go into a colonnade, or you might go into a courtyard, or you might go into a hall that has like a bunch of columns that are very, very, 100 feet tall or what have you, huge columns you walk in. So people would add things to it. So he added the third pylon, huge gateway, beautiful gateway at the Temple of Karnak, which was a significant accomplishment, and he documented that. He also added in a colonnade and many buildings at the Temple of Luxor as well. So he was building in that whole area of Waset. He made a beautiful barge, which is like a boat, to kind of carry the a statuette of Amen. So that was like a significant thing that he did. That was a part of a ceremony that they were honoring Amen in Thebes and Waset during his lifetime. So his building projects and the things he did, including the quote unquote, colossi of Amenhotep III, were significant. And they actually kind of helped under his reign. They helped the art of ancient Kemet just move forward. You found development in all kinds of artwork and all kinds of depictions of him that you might see that were beautiful and slightly different. You saw architecture that was kind of pushing the edge and that was doing even more in terms of Amen. You saw increases and developments and additions to the temple at Luxor, as well as the temple of Karnak. So he becomes a significant builder in his life. And so when I think about that, I started thinking about some of the things he did. He reigned for at least 38 years. He becomes someone who I think is a dynamic leader. When you add it all up together, he becomes a dynamic leader. And he is not only, as I mentioned, and I want to kind of point this out, not only was Queen Tiye his wife, but apparently under him, he had a series of commemorative scarab. So imagine like a scarab, which is like kind of like a beetle, but it was a really decorative and holy and special thing to be made in ancient Kemet. He had a series of scarabs made for important events that he did in his life. And one of the scarabs he had made was for his wife, his Queen Tiye. And it mentions her as a queen. It doesn't say the date like of their marriage, but it is believed that it is their marriage scarab. So because he mentions her in a way where he talks about she was the wife of the great king, which was him, right? Amenhotep III. It mentions who her father was. It mentions who her mother was, which is a lot of times when you would see queens mentioned in that way, they didn't always mention the queen's lineage and who her family, who her father and mother were. But they mention it. He mentions it on the scarab. And he also mentions her, living forever. And you begin to see from Amenhotep the third's time on through the remainder of the dynasty, 18th dynasty, you begin to see women, the queens, mentioned right alongside the kings whenever they did official state occasion, when there was an official state function that would happen or something they might do. they would mention the queen. So you would see him, if you think about his this colossal at Memnon, you would see him mentioning the queen. He would say, I'm dedicating this. This is something that I'm doing for, for Amen, for God, for my father, Amen. This is Amenhotep III and Queen Tiye, who is the great wife of and beloved. He mentions them side by side. So it's interesting because you start to see women looked at, and there are other examples, obviously, in Kemet and even in the 18th dynasty with Hatshepsut, right? She was a part of the 18th dynasty. She would have been in his lineage way up. She was a part of the 18th dynasty. She would have been one of his predecessors. You see things and indications of Kemetic women holding power and significance in the 18th dynasty. And under Amenhotep III, that was one of the ways that it would happen. That was one of the things he did, was to recognize and to acknowledge his wife at state functions and state occasions. And apparently his successors, at least for the remainder of the 18th dynasty, did the same thing. So you would see Akhenaten recognizing people. You would see people recognizing the queen right along with the king. So I just wanted to share that. I just wanted to give you some information with respect to Amenhotep III. I hope it encouraged you to read up more about him, that you like him, that you found out more about him. I ask that you share this with me. I thank you so much for listening to me. God bless you, and I hope you have a good day.